Have you ever noticed how the body reacts before the mind admits anything? That quiet tightening in the chest after an argument? That unsettled feeling when the night feels longer than it should? Not fear, not jealousy. Something quieter, something older. Most men learn early to silence that instinct. They call it insecurity. They bury it under logic. They convince themselves that love means trust without limits. But Stoic wisdom never asked you to be blind. It asked to be awake. The deepest betrayals rarely arrive with drama. They arrive softly, through changes so small they can be denied, through absences that explain themselves, through warmth that cools without warning. And the real pain is not loss. Loss is honest. Loss announces itself. The real pain is presence without belonging, holding what no longer meets you, sharing space with someone whose inner world has quietly moved on. Attachment is a strange thing. It forms not through passion, but repetition, through shared mornings, through familiar silence, through the assumption that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. That is why impermanence wounds us so deeply, not because things end, but because we believe they are exempt from ending. The Stoics warned us about this. They spoke often of borrowed things. They said, never mistake what is given for what is owned. People are not possessions. Affection is not a contract. Desire is not permanent. When a woman's emotional center shifts, it rarely announces itself in words. It moves first through distance, through restraint, through subtle withdrawal. The body knows before the story changes. Touch becomes careful. Eye contact shortens. The natural lean-in disappears. Not rejection, not hostility, just absence. And men, conditioned to fix rather than observe, respond by offering more reassurance, more pursuit, more explanation. But attachment, when it senses imbalance, tightens its grip, and tightening never restores what has loosened. There's a moment in every relationship where silence asks a question, not, what did I do wrong, but, am I still chosen? This is where emotional boundaries matter, not as walls, but as anchors. A man with no inner anchor will chase clarity from another person. A grounded man lets reality reveal itself. Stoic restraint is not coldness, it is respect for truth. It is the discipline to pause instead of pleading, to notice instead of accusing, to step back instead of collapsing inward. Because the mind that rushes to confront is often trying to outrun grief, and grief, when denied, turns into humiliation. Impermanence does not mean bitterness. It means readiness. Ready to accept that closeness can fade. Ready to see people as they are, not as they were. Ready to walk away from what no longer meets you without rage. In the first phase of emotional detachment, nothing dramatic happens. Life continues. Routines stay intact. Words remain polite. But the energy has shifted. And energy never lies. The Stoics believe the wise man watches patterns, not promises. Behavior, not reassurance. Consistency, not explanation. If something feels different, it is. The mistake is not noticing. The mistake is bargaining with what you already know.
When attachment begins to loosen, it rarely does so all at once. It unravels, quietly, methodically, almost politely. This is the stage where most men lose themselves, not because they lack strength, but because they mistake endurance for wisdom. They stay present while being slowly excluded. They listen while no longer being heard. They offer warmth to someone who has begun conserving theirs elsewhere. The Stoics understood something modern relationships often forget. When the soul withdraws, the body follows, and when the body hesitates, the truth is already moving. In this phase, emotional energy turns inward. A woman may still laugh, still talk, still show fragments of affection, but it feels rehearsed, measured, slightly delayed, not false, just no longer spontaneous. And spontaneity is the fingerprint of desire. Attachment, when threatened by guilt, begins to reorganize. The mind looks for relief. The conscience looks for justification. This is where projection is born. Small irritations appear. Conversations tilt towards criticism. Minor flaws become recurring themes, not because you changed, but because blame is easier than honesty. Guilt is heavy, and the human psyche instinctively tries to move that weight elsewhere. A man who does not understand this begins defending himself, explaining, apologizing, shrinking. But Stoic clarity demands something else entirely: stillness. Not silence as punishment, silence as observation. When you stop reacting, patterns speak. You notice how quickly irritation fades when you step back, how conflict loses energy when it finds no resistance, how accusations collapse without an audience. This is not emotional manipulation, it is emotional self-respect. Boundaries are not ultimatums, they are quiet decisions about what you will no longer absorb. Impermanence becomes visible here, not as betrayal, but as redirection. The Stoics never asked you to cling to what is leaving. They asked you to accept reality before it humiliates you. Another shift occurs during this phase. Time changes. Absences grow longer. Explanations become shorter. Presence becomes conditional. Not because time is scarce, but because priority has moved. This is difficult for attachment to accept, because attachment believes loyalty is proven by tolerance. But tolerance without reciprocity erodes dignity, and dignity, once compromised, is rarely restored within the same dynamic. The disciplined mind does not interrogate, it observes frequency, consistency, repetition. One late night can be circumstance, a pattern is information. One cold moment can be stress, a trend is truth. Stoicism teaches restraint not to suppress emotion, but to prevent emotion from distorting perception. When you stop chasing reassurance, you regain clarity. When you stop demanding explanations, you see behavior clearly. And here is the hardest truth most men avoid. Trying to save a bond that is already detaching often accelerates the detachment, because desperation signals fear. And fear is not attractive, it is burdensome. In this phase, the relationship is no longer about connection. It becomes a test of self-mastery. Will you abandon yourself to maintain proximity, or will you remain intact even if closeness fades? The Stoics chose integrity over attachment, not because they felt less, but because they understood the cost of clinging.
There comes a point where uncertainty exhausts itself, not with answers, with clarity. This is the moment many men fear, because it removes hope's last disguise. Not the dramatic ending, not the confrontation, but the quiet realization that you are no longer standing in the same place emotionally. At this stage, attachment reveals its final lesson. It shows you how much of yourself you were willing to abandon just to keep something familiar alive. The Stoics believed suffering intensifies when we resist what is already happening. Pain is natural. Resistance is optional. When a bond has shifted, no amount of vigilance restores its original shape. You cannot reason desire back into existence. You cannot negotiate presence. The moment you stop trying to prove your value, you begin to remember it. This is where emotional boundaries stop being theory and become practice. You no longer ask why. You no longer wait for reassurance. You no longer scan tone, timing, or mood for meaning. You accept what is being shown. Acceptance is not surrender.
It is alignment with reality. And reality is this: people choose every day, sometimes silently, sometimes without malice, sometimes without courage. Impermanence does not mean someone is evil. It means they are human. Stoic calm does not harden heart, it steadies it. You allow grief to exist without letting it command you. You allow disappointment without turning it inward. You allow distance without chasing it. In doing so, something subtle but powerful occurs. The dynamic ends internally before it ends externally. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself. This shift changes everything, not because it brings the other person back, but because it brings you back. You speak less, you observe more. You move with deliberation instead of impulse. And paradoxically, this is when truth surfaces most clearly, not because you demanded it, but because you no longer needed it. Whether the relationship dissolves or simply reveals its limits, you are no longer diminished by the outcome. The Stoics taught that dignity is preserved not by control, but by conduct. You cannot govern another's desire, but you can govern your response. You can walk away without bitterness. You can stay silent without resentment. You can leave without erasing what was real. This is strength rarely celebrated because it is quiet and because it refuses drama. But it is the strength that lasts. In the end, clarity frees you, not by giving you certainty, but by removing illusion. And when illusion falls, self-respect remains. If these reflections resonated with you and you value conversations like this that cut through noise and bring calm clarity, your support through a simple like or subscription genuinely helps this space continue.